Let's talk about stablecoins. But before we jump in, let's touch on the basics of blockchain, the core ideas. Traditionally, the way exchanges of value have been done is that you've had a trusted third party, there has been some fees, and it's been fairly slow to achieve, especially if you're going across countries from different parts of the world. Now, when it comes to the core ideas of the Nakamoto blockchain, there are four that I'd like to point out. One is the open ledger, as opposed to what you see in your bank. Here you can see everybody else's value. You also have a chain of transactions. That means you can walk through and confirm how much everybody has on this platform. And this is useful because if a transaction is proposed for which there are not enough funds, you can detect that right away. Now, the other part of this as well is that as opposed to the trusted third party that holds the data for the platform, in this case, every participant has a copy of the data. Now, the last part of this, the last point, is the mechanism through which we allow new transactions to be added to avoid cheating and to be able to verify and have integrity within the platform. And that is the consensus mechanism. Now, all of this has been addressed by the core ideas that were introduced by Satoshi Nakamoto, and we were able to build platforms that had some of the initial goals. That is, to remove the intermediaries, to be able to do it near real time or in real time, and to be able to do it for lower fees or no fees. On the core of these powerful ideas, major platforms were created, and Bitcoin generated hundreds of billions of dollars of value. Ethereum generated tens of billions. Certainly no small feat, and it led to a tremendous wave of innovation throughout the financial industry and in many other domains as well. However, there are some serious challenges when it comes to the cryptocurrencies, the volatility being one of the biggest ones. And some of the problems here are tied to risk. Imagine being paid in Bitcoin. Now, if you started getting paid, say, a couple months back, you'd be feeling pretty good because it's had quite a great growth within this period. However, if you started getting paid and your salary was set a year back, then, or a little bit more than a year back when it was at double the currency value that it is today, you'd be pretty upset. Now imagine having the same thing with loans, and depending on where you got them, you could be in the hole by, say, a factor of 10x. And so all of this leads to a lot of challenges as you start to use it as a financial instrument. And ultimately, there's a lot of users that do not want to speculate. They want to store money, they want to use money, they want something that has less censorship or has some of the properties that really are enabling an expediency that we haven't had before. And so because of that, there is really a great need for the concept of stability within the platform. Many of the consumers feel that it is just too risky, it is just too scary to go there today. So the concept of a stable coin, a coin that has enough intelligence so that it can provide stability with the features that we know we can get from blockchain, has been the holy grail for quite some time. And it has certainly dominated the discussion of the blockchain world within the last year. And there are three core groups of stablecoins that have been proposed. The first one is a fiat collateralized, the second one is a crypto collateralized, and the third one is a non-collateralized. All of them are exciting, all of them provide really interesting innovations, and so let's take a walk through these three buckets or these three groups. And we'll start off with the simplest one to grasp, and that is the fiat-backed. That is a one-to-one exchange to a stable fiat currency like the US dollar, in which case for every dollar that you put in, you would get one stable coin. So the idea is quite accessible. It is much like you would think. You put in $1, you get back a coin. When you liquidate, you turn over your stable coin, or your stable coin is destroyed, and you get back the USD. So you can think of it in a conceptual way, much like this diagram, where if you are putting in $1, you get a stable coin, and once you cash in that stable coin, you could get back your fiat currency, and the exchange rate there would be 1-to-1. Now, the advantages, as mentioned, and this is important because it leads to confidence, it's a very simple model to understand. It is 100% price stable, or as stable as the fiat currency is, and it's less vulnerable to hacks because there's no collateral held on blockchain. Now, the disadvantages of this is that we're back to trusting an organization. There has to be someone who holds that reserve. That means that needs to be audited. That means that in many geographies, it will be highly regulated. Not only that, those regulations will change from country to country. And more than that, governments may step in and have or interfere with the operation of this stable coin. So there are some drawbacks to that. Also, the on and off ramps onto this world will have to touch the current traditional banking system, which means that there could be some delays, and you would have the normal friction that you've always had with the traditional banking institutions. So there are certainly some advantages being in the digital world once you're in, and assuming you're not in a heavily regulated environment or in a high risk of regulation environment, you would have all of the advantages of programmable money, which are huge. However, there are some risks there as well. Now, if we want to address the centralization part, we can take a look. Oh, and before we do that, there's a couple there that I would recommend to take a look at if you're interested. The first one is USDC from Circle and Coinbase, some of the biggest players in the blockchain world. And the other one is the most recent offering from Facebook, and more to come on that at the end. The other one, as I mentioned, is crypto collateralized. This can exist fully on blockchain. The advantages of that are, just as mentioned, you do not have to go through the payment gateways. You can exist fully in the blockchain world, and that has some great advantages. The first one being, as we mentioned before, is that it's decentralized. It lives fully on the blockchain. It might be regulated by certain countries, but certainly no third party would host that in any one nation. Those contracts and that logic will all exist fully on blockchain and would have the properties and characteristics that the blockchain has today. That is, if, say, the United States wanted to shut down cryptocurrencies within its geography, it could. However, the rest of the world would continue to operate. And so that leads to some agility and some of the guarantees that blockchain has that are desirable. However, when it comes to the collateralized ratio, when it comes to the exchange rate to crypto, we couldn't have the same thing that we had on the fiat backed. If we did one stable coin to one cryptocurrency, then we have the same volatility that if we had the cryptocurrency itself. So we need to have some collateralized ratio. We need to have some safety to account for the volatility that exists on the platforms. Now, the advantages of this model, as we mentioned before, is that it could be more decentralized. We could liquidate very easily with smart contracts in and out. However, the disadvantages are that we're still dealing with the cryptocurrency world, and it is certainly less stable than the fiat. In a mad dash equivalent to a banking run, we could have an auto-liquidated environment where we could have some challenges. And ultimately, it's an inefficient use of capital. This is the opposite of banks that some people might say it's good. However, you don't have the one-to-one. In this case, you have the one to more than one, and that certainly leads to inefficiencies. And you also have complexity when it comes to the logic that needs to live on blockchain. That could certainly be addressed over time, but on the outset, it could lead to some distrust of this environment. If you're interested in this model, one of the ones to take a look at is the DAI by MakerDAO. They have been quite open in their discussions and their documents and their design considerations. And so this is a good one to dig into if this model is of interest to you. The last one that we'll take a look at is the non-collateralized coin or stable coin. Now, this one is fascinating when it comes to its ambitious agenda. It wants to perform the function that central banks have performed within nations. And typically that has been the following. The central banks print new money when the price of a currency goes up, and they buy it back and destroy it when the price goes down. In this case, the same thing would be done within this digital platform, and we could do the same, something very similar with smart contracts. We could create new coins when the price goes up, and we could buy back and destroy coins when the price goes down. Now, all of that sounds pretty simple. However, look at the stability of fiat currencies throughout the world and the function on central banks, and you can start to see some of the challenges. This has a tremendous amount of potential. However, the ability to be able to get it off the ground is certainly monstrous. And one of the best things to do in this space is to read the documentation, to learn about the companies, because even if the full idea is not realized, there are many components that could be useful to the financial industry and to many governments. As with many other technologies, we don't have to have the full 100% purity of the initial idea to benefit from some of the properties or some of the components. The advantages would be tremendous. As mentioned, there would be no collateral required. It would be the most decentralized and independent, and it could create a platform for the world that would provide something that hasn't existed in any way, shape, or form. And it would not be tied, in this case, to any cryptocurrency or fiat. Now, the disadvantages are many. There's a tremendous amount of complexity. There's a tremendous amount of risk. And when it comes to the features, I mentioned about being able to print or being able to burn or destroy. There are some parts of this that are harder than others. The ability to make more coins is not difficult. The ability to be able to destroy is more challenging. And there's a number of publications here that I'll point to that address some of these challenges. And there's more than one way. And this is why I was mentioning that it is, even though it's tremendously ambitious, it is a great platform, and some of the ideas that have been brought to it are certainly worth your time to be able to learn, because as I mentioned before, they could be used to address many other challenges even without buying into the full idea. As I mentioned, this is something that even the human counterparts that are performing this function today have struggles with, so it's certainly a big challenge. If you want to look at a couple of good cases, Basis was one that received over 100 million in funding and decided to shut down, mostly because of the regulatory challenges that I ran into. And this is something that is quite common when it comes to blockchain technologies. Many of the ideas work potentially well when it comes to the technology. However, there are many regulatory government rules and stances that need to be addressed all over the world. The other one would be the reserve coin, which is being more conservative than Basis. And Basis, by the way, as I mentioned, had to pull back because of the regulatory restrictions and had to return the money back to investors. But Reserve ultimately wants to be a non-collateralized currency, but it's starting out with a more traditional model. And this may be a good formula where you can start off, say, with a fiat back or a crypto backed, and then eventually start to take some risk or start to test some of the waters when it comes to non-collateralized. Now, if all of this seems like a moonshot, science fiction, and way too crazy an idea to try, I encourage you to take a look at Libra. Facebook is introducing a fiat-backed, the most conservative model of a currency, and wants to tie it to their platform, and wants to also present some of the properties of blockchain, and wants to provide some avoidance of censorship, and wants to provide a currency that would be more stable than many in the developing world. And it is quite ambitious in its undertaking. Already it has over $1 billion committed in funding, and it has a number of partners that it's launching with that are not trivial. A lot of the credit card companies like MasterCard and Visa. You can see there some of the digital payments companies as well, like PayPal. There's transportation companies like Uber. You can see entertainment companies like Spotify. eBay, and many others, as well as, of course, the over 1 billion users on Facebook. Will this be successful is one of the big questions. If it is, it could certainly shake up the financial industry, and it could prove something that initially 10 years back by the initial founders of this core ideas, as mentioned at the beginning, was a dream that potentially could work. We've come quite a long way, and Libra presents the latest attempt at a stable currency. It has a great shot at making this real. The big questions, I think, in my mind throughout the next year will be that of the regulation when it comes to countries that is imposed. There's already countries like India that have said not here. So we will see how this plays out, but it's certainly a very exciting landscape. The question of stable coins is certainly already here. If you want to look at a very mature one, look at USDC, the one from Coinbase and Circle, that has a great set of fundamentals and has a nonprofit that is administering or that is providing governance to the stable currency, and that is a great one to learn from. So with this, I'll go ahead and close and wish you lots of fun enjoying learning about these new technologies.